That's what I believe, but I don't always love believing it. Yeah. It's not a very comforting worldview. Hello, friends.
Hola, compadres.
Oh, we're bilingual now?
Maybe. I didn't take Spanish. I'm just hoping that meant friends. Sounds right.
Well, whoever you are in whatever language, hello, and welcome to Pickles and Vodka, the mental health podcast about imperfect people where imperfect people have imperfect conversations.
Imperfect people having imperfect conversations. Boom.
Yeah. I'm Christina.
I'm Lauren, and I'm prepared.
Lauren is definitely the more prepared between the two of us.
I actually practice that because we always fuck it up.
So today is going to be a little different from our previous episodes.
In a way.
In a way, yeah. I'm really excited because while we don't have a guest, we did reach out to one of our longtime listeners. She's not been a guest, but it feels like she's been a guest because she sends in so many voicemails.
And she's really going to help us out this time.
Yeah, so we knew we wanted to talk about death just as a concept and how it affects mental health. And Alyssa has actually worked in the death industry. So we thought she would be the perfect person to ask to send in some recordings about this stuff. So what we're going to do on this episode, we're going to have some really heavy conversations about a very heavy topic. Of course, we're going to put our own spin on it, and we're going to cope with it how we do, which is by sometimes making jokes. But it is a serious episode, and I wanted to do, like, a trigger warning.
Not to make light of anything that, like, death is funny. But,
exactly.
Yeah.
But it is a part of life, and I think we should be able to talk about it, which is what we wanted to do on this episode. So before we listen to the voicemails that Alyssa sent, I wanted to quickly go over not only the pickle poll answers, but also, like, our own experiences with death. One of the reasons I wanted to make this episode is because I have not experienced any major deaths in my life yet. And I know that's not common for someone who's 30 years old. And it's something that
got addressed, I saw.
Yeah, it did get addressed. So real quick, before we get to the pickle poll, I think we should talk about how we're doing this week. So Lauren, where are you at? I know you're going through a lot.
Yeah. I am trying to move, and it is so stressful. Like, I've almost been resentful the past couple of days because I live alone, and while I'm trying to get everything done, feeling like, I know people that have moved recently, but, they're married or they're living with someone or something like that, and they have some help, and I'm just kind of like, I'm trying to pack, I'm trying to cancel all my utilities here and get them started there and make sure that I get all the fees and things that I need to pay to the people running my next apartment on time, and everyone seems to be bugging me and being like, well, you need this, why don't we have that? And I'm just like, I'm trying to also get my house packed, okay?
Oh my god, yeah, moving is a special kind of hell, and I've done it alone a lot, but the last time I moved recently, I did it with my partner, and it was such a better experience. Like, I can't imagine doing it on your own. I mean, I can, and it sucks.
Yeah, it's just that, and that's why I said more recently, I've just felt some things like, well, I'm trying to get everything else done, and something else pops in my head, and I'm like, wouldn't it be nice if I had somebody else that I could just be like, can you just make sure that the gas gets canceled?
Yeah, Pico, you're on that.
Right?
Meatball, you can handle bubble wrap.
Oh my god, you picked his favorite thing.
I know something about kittens.
Yes.
Yeah, and I appreciate you taking the time in the middle of moving to do this. I was like, so we're talking about death. It's going to be very serious, and you're going to be in the middle of moving, but it'll be fine. This episode is also airing on Halloween.
Yes, I liked that little kind of nod to Halloween and death.
So you're packing now. When do you actually, like, get into your new place?
So Monday, on Halloween, actually, I pick up my keys.
Oh, I love that.
And as I've been telling people the last few days, I feel like my neighbors are doing everything in their power the last couple of nights to make me remember why I can't stand living here.
Oh, no.
So, I mean, they're being extra noisy. The neighbor lady below me is talking on the phone really loud until like 1:30 in the morning.
If you didn't need any other validation.
Exactly. So it says it's getting to the point where it's so bad that I'm just kind of like, you know what? I'm going to pick my keys up on Monday. I don't care if I sleep on a pile of laundry. I don't want to sleep an extra night here than I have to.
Yeah, my last apartment that I was in by myself, I had a lot of bad memories there, so it felt really good. Like not just to physically leave the place and get everything clean and empty, but also just being like, okay, I'm leaving this version of myself behind.
Yes.
I'm taking the good stuff, leaving the bad stuff, and we're gonna start over.
Mm-hmm. And so then the next day that I have a friend is going to help me bring a couple of carloads of stuff over.
Nice. Okay,
So
good.
then I should have enough to kind of like semi-comfortably live until 2 days later when my movers take everything else.
Nice. I'm so excited for you. Your
Me
new place is
too.
unreal. Like, I've seen pictures. Y'all have no idea. What is it, a renovated schoolhouse?
Yeah, we should post some of my pictures.
Oh, we will.
Yeah, you can't believe it until you see it. Like, I have this amazing
I was
window.
bowled over. I am so excited to record there in December when I visit
Yes,
you.
me
I might just
too.
move in. Sorry
Okay.
to my partner my partner doesn't really listen to this podcast. It's fine. Yeah,
And
I'm
you
just
probably
gonna move
both
in.
fit if you want. I mean, I've pointed out that I have 2 bedrooms, but I also they said like, oh, you know, like the one you're getting has this extra storage space. The storage space is the size of a bedroom.
Oh my god.
So
It's gonna be so great. Like, you deserve it. It's gonna be hard. Like, getting through the moving process is always hard, but
Yeah.
when you get through it, it'll be
once
worth
it's
it.
done, I'm gonna be so happy. Yes.
Yeah. I've been doing all right this week. I'm really proud of myself, actually, because I've focused a lot on self-care this week, and I've always been really bad at doing that in the past. Like, I'm the kind of person who will work through a shift even if I'm like throwing up because I don't want to go home. Like, I don't want people to think that I'm just like lazy. But
I relate to that.
yeah, but this week I've really been paying extra attention to how I feel because I've been, hormonal because of like my period or whatever. And like I've said in past episodes, I'm not used to getting a period regularly with the eating disorder stuff. And so when it happens,
See, I never lost mine,
I mean, I also
which
have,
I mean is good on some way, but yeah.
I mean, I also have birth control, like the IUD, and so that
Oh, okay.
makes it even worse. So I get suicidal and just debilitatingly anxious on
Yeah.
weeks that I get my period. And so this week I've been really like slowing down and noticing if I don't feel like going out, I don't make myself go out. Because in the past, like if I just sat at home and didn't do anything all day or didn't even go on a walk, I would just beat myself up. Because God forbid I don't do anything. But I recently listened to a podcast. I forget what it was, but they were saying like rest is an activity. Like rest
Oh,
is
I love that.
something that you need to do. Like you need
Yeah.
to, if you're resting, that's productive actually. And so that really changed the way I thought about like rest. And so on Wednesday, I was feeling really sick at work. Like I was going to throw up. My acid reflux was really bad because, I'm recovering from bulimia. And so I have constant acid reflux. I should just buy stock in Tums at this point.
Right.
And so I left like 2 hours early and I felt really guilty about it, but I rested and I was really happy I did. So I just wanted to brag about that.
That's awesome, especially because I did the opposite. I just realized.
Learn from me.
I woke up like early Tuesday morning with like the worst migraine I've had in a super long time. You know, the ones where it's just kind of like, it's just so much pain that you feel like all you can do is lay on the floor and cry, but you can't cry because that makes it hurt more.
Oh, yeah.
And so when it wasn't going away, I know like 6:30 in the morning, then I sent a message to work and I was just like, I didn't even want to, I didn't even want the light of my phone. So I'm sure there was just like typos and everything, it was just like bad migraine, can't come in. Boom.
Okay, so you did call out.
Yes. But then I do have these kind of like super meds that are the only thing that touch it. And I remembered I had those. So I took them and I woke up about like 9 o'clock, like, oh, it's gone. And, like that was good, but still, when you have a really bad migraine like that, I feel like the rest of the day is kind of precarious. You're always like, don't move too much, it might come back.
Oh, I can't imagine.
But I woke up at that point and I was like, oh, well, I'm okay, and I'm going to take some days off to move, and I got a lot of shit to get done at work, so I just, sent them another message like, okay, the meds worked, I'll be in at noon.
Oh, you tried.
Yeah, yes.
Self-care is a practice. It really is. And if you're not used to taking care of yourself, it doesn't matter how old you are, you gotta practice at it. And even if, like, little things like that, like going in a few hours later, I think that's a win.
Yeah, and I do love, though, what you said. I'm going to try and remind myself that's an activity.
It really is. We do love activities.
Yes. Right.
Okay, are you ready to talk about death?
Yes.
Okay.
We got a lot.
Yeah. The pickle poll is a question that we put out every couple weeks to start a conversation about mental health. And our listeners respond, whether via voicemail or in the comments, and it's pretty great. So
yeah, we got a lot of good comments this time.
Yeah, so the question that we posted was pretty simple. It was just, have you ever known anyone that died, and how did it affect your mental health? Mm-hmm. Tell me why you wanted to post that question in particular.
So we knew we were going to talk about death, and we went back and forth, and we kind of struggled with how to word it. And the second to the last possibility, I felt like Christina had a pretty good just kind of summarization of it, but I know I did specifically say, like, I really want to start it out just saying, point blank, have you known anyone that died? Because I felt like that opens up people the most to just be like, oh, I need to talk about this.
So before we read the answers that people commented, I already answered for myself. What about you, Lauren? I know that you have known people that died. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yes, I do. And one of them, I'm hoping, because there is a specific question that I asked for Alyssa to answer in relation to, you know what, I'm going to let Meatball in.
Okay, yeah.
He's being way more annoying outside.
Yeah, we'll start over the question.
Just come on in, Pooper. Yeah. All right. I put his toy that jingles up high so he can't.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
All right.
He's so cute. I just can't be mad at him. I can't.
I know.
Okay, so start over your answer to what's your experience with people who've died.
Yeah, so there's one thing that I really want to get into, but I want to get into it when Alyssa talks about a specific question that I asked. And
yeah, her voicemails will lead to a lot of conversations.
Yeah, and that's going to be my first experience. But other than that, I know it's been brought up before, and sadly, it's me trying to just not even always get help with my mental health. Sometimes just get some kind of, like, people that understand and get some community. But, like, really finding other people that share that. And I feel like that is what has brought on, unfortunately, more people that I know that have died. Because it ends up being, like, suicide and depression and eating disorder complications and... yeah.
Would you say you've known more people that have died than most people your age?
I would say that I've known more people, let's say, like, under 40 who've died. Like, more people who've died young.
Yeah. That's not...
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I don't have that experience, and so I don't know what's typical and what's not. Mm-hmm. I think it is less common to know as many people as you have that have died at that age. I don't think that's very common.
No.
Did you find, having lost that many people, that it's easier to talk about this stuff?
Kind of. I mean, I think there's still the ones, that, like, really hurt. But at the same time, it's just kind of like you start, I mean...
I can imagine they never stop hurting.
No, but I remember leaving treatment my first time and knowing that a few people were in some pretty bad places or got right back in them once, they got home. Yeah. And I remember thinking at one point of just, like, 3 people in particular, and I was just like, one of them's not going to last the year. I know it. And that was scary.
Did they?
They made it a year, but maybe not 2.
That's so sad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, so we won't go into it too much, but there is that guilt when you get better or, like, get out and they don't, and it is a really hard feeling to navigate. So let's read some of these comments.
Let's take turns. How about that?
Yeah, let's take turns. I'll read the first one. So the first comment we got on Instagram is from Anamoya Analog. It's someone I know in real life. Okay. She says... I'm going to minimize because we can elaborate later. Ha ha. She wants to be on the podcast eventually. But when my mom died, it sucked. Thinking about that actually makes me think of how many people I know that have died. It feels like a lot, but I convince myself these are quote-unquote first world losses and quote-unquote first world problems. Sounds weird, maybe, but that's how it affected my mental health. Am I making sense?
First of all, yes. I really love that first world losses.
Yeah.
That was something that really stuck out.
That resonated with a few people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you relate to that? I feel like I can't really speak because I haven't lost anyone close to me.
This I think was the first comment that I saw show up, and it felt like, I don't know, it mirrored my soul in some ways just when it started out. I'm just going to minimize, because I was like, yep, that'd be the first thing that I do, is just be like...
Yeah, on the last episode you talked about how you minimize things.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, as will come up, there's some things that probably people would see as, like, very tragic and sad, and I'm just kind of like, well, yeah, but, you know, it wasn't that big a deal because of XYZ.
Yeah, and everyone... Like, a lot of people know people that die, and as you get older, it happens more and more, and so I can see how you would think that it is minimized because everyone has had that experience. You don't think you're special. I mean, I'm just hypothesizing here. Is that how you felt?
Yeah, and also I'm thinking, like, maybe this person answering, I mean, blunt, but obviously true. She's like, when my mom died, it sucked. Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you answer this question now, I can see where it's like, at this point, you've probably had to tell people so much and heard everybody's reaction that it almost kind of, like, numbs it to some point. So I can see where you get to start to minimize, because you're like, I've already went through the shock of this happened to me.
Yeah. People cope in all sorts of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So next comment.
Yeah, so this is... well, I'm still not entirely positive. I'm going to say rouse therapy.
Rouse therapy.
Ruse therapy, yeah.
Yeah, so before we read it, this is a previous podcast guest.
Oh, cool.
His name is David Kalili, and he's a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in sex anxiety, queer, multi-ethnic issues, polyamory, kink, and a lot more. We did an episode, it's episode 67, Smorgasbord of Delights.
I want to go back and listen to this one.
It's so good. He's an amazing human, and he's grown his practice a lot since we did that episode. There's, like, more practitioners there now. It's really great. If anyone's interested
so cool.
in, like, sex positivity and, like, all the stuff I just mentioned, check out Rouse Therapy. But yeah, read his comment.
All right. Yeah, I'm already seeing. This is the one that made my jaw drop. I've experienced multiple deaths since 13, including a friend die in a motorcycle wreck in front of me at 15.
Jesus.
I know. Lots of friends lost to substances and family members to cancer. In my experience, it can really disrupt your sense of security and certainty. In some ways, it's important perspective to have about life. Would have been cool to start that perspective a little later, personally speaking.
Yeah.
Side note, it's wild when I meet people in their 30s who haven't experienced a significant loss.
That's me.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, I really loved the part that, said, like, it would have been nice to start that a little perspective later, which, yeah, I totally get that, especially when you've seen so many people just die too young.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like I said, I saw the same thing. I was considerably older when that started for me, but yeah.
So I have a confession. I'm kind of sensitive about the fact that I haven't experienced any major deaths at the age of 30. And so a few people made comments like this. Like, it's so crazy. Like, a friend messaged me and said, the craziest part about that question was that I didn't realize there were people that hadn't experienced death yet.
Oh my gosh.
And my reaction to those at first was to be a little hurt, complete honesty, which is so ridiculous, right?
Well, I wondered when I read that, I actually did, like, catch that, and I wondered, I was like, is that going to sound kind of like a slight? But I was hoping, because I felt like him saying that, it sounded like saying, like, there's multiple people. Like, I was hoping that made you feel like you're not the only one.
Oh,
it's just
yeah.
kind of a weird thing, you know, to this person who has experienced it so much first.
I know. And, you know, both experiences are totally valid. Like, if you have lost a lot of people, or even, like, one or two people, or no people, like, it's all valid. We can't really control this. And so that one of the reasons I was happy that we posted the question the way we did is because I was kind of expecting to get that comment, and, like, I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
Like,
good.
that insecurity. The next comment is from Sumoji, who is a dear friend of mine in real life. And she didn't really elaborate, but she did say that oof, this was my catalyst to what made me spiral.
I was hoping this was somebody, that you knew, because when it was just that single sentence like that, I was like, I hope that you're going to have some more insight on that, because I bet you will.
I do. And I don't want to share a lot on the podcast. I don't know what she's comfortable with me sharing.
Right.
But she lost her dad. And, she is closer to your age. She has 3 kids and a husband. And, I met her at Starbucks, actually. She's one of my favorite people on earth. And I always looked up to her as this really, really strong person. She always just was one of those people that did it all. She was the person who actually inspired me to go. I mean, I was in school at the time when I met her, and she was in school as well. We both went to this program through Starbucks. But, she really motivated me to keep doing it and to graduate. And when she lost her dad, she just spiraled, like she said in her comment.
Yeah.
And it was really eye-opening because she was in a lot of pain, and she was pretty open about it online. And I really appreciated that. Because it shows that, no matter what stage in life you are, you can still experience these just devastating losses that can cause you to spiral. Even if your life is amazing and full. And I know for her it was very unexpected. And so...
Yeah, and this reminds me of something that I heard. It was a while ago, and I don't necessarily remember that well, so I might be paraphrasing badly. But I remember hearing someone say recently that it was yes, there are, the stages of death that you go through, the grief, the acceptance, denial, all this stuff. And they're but it's not a set pattern where it's you spend so much time in this and then this. And they're and it's not linear. Sometimes you go back and you repeat some.
It's like recovery. It's anything, any process that you need to go through to grow or just to get through one of life's chapters. Because there's so many things life throws at you that... people tell you how to deal with it, but you can't really know how you're going to deal with it until it happens, and everyone deals with it in their own way.
Yeah, I felt like that helped me understand some friends like that, might have gone through a parent death or something really significant, where it's kind of you see them go through the stages and you're okay, you're at the one before acceptance, so after this you should be fine. And it's nope, then maybe they just go back to grief. That happens.
Yeah. Let's read the last comment, because then we can get into Alyssa's voicemail. She talks a lot about that.
Okay. You will love this with your religious upbringing. For some reason, when I saw this name, I got recovering P-A-S-T, and immediately I thought as in pastor.
Recovering pastaholic. Oh,
it's pasta! And I was thinking
Lauren,
a pastor.
I literally thought it was a pastor until this very moment. I thought it was recovering pastorholic. And
yes.
it is pastaholic.
Pastaholic.
Oh
but it
God.
did take me 2 or 3 times reading it too before I was oh, pasta.
I follow so many
like spaghetti.
religious deconstruction accounts, and I also follow a lot of eating disorder recovery accounts, so this is sometimes they intersect. Anyway.
I love it. Anyway, recovering pastaholic says, yes, all caps. So many people, especially within the last year. A few deaths in the past really sent me into a downward spiral of depression and self-destructive coping mechanisms to, quote, numb the pain. Lately, the losses have come in the form of ugly reminders that life is short, which has given me more anxiety than anything. I feel like my time is running out, too, and I have to hurry up and get my shit together or do the things I want before my time is up.
Whew. I mean, I can relate to that.
I feel that so hard.
Yep.
Yes.
The anxiety is just overwhelming. And
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't experienced any deaths, but I do have a lot of death anxiety just waiting for my first big death. And the anxiety is just unreal.
One thing I think of that I'm kind of afraid of is, so I'm in my 40s, my next big milestone will be 50, and I always remember my mom saying when she turned 50, what she said was when I turned 40, it was all about the number and the getting older, and she's but when I turned 50, it was about time.
How much time you have left. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
and that makes me think am I going to feel that way? Am I going to start thinking all the time I'm probably more than halfway there?
I mean, I have felt like that for a while
Yeah.
now. I feel like I didn't think I would reach 30.
Well, yeah, I was going to say also at 25. I thought I'm more than halfway there. Yes.
Let's play Alyssa's voicemail. Because
Okay.
she sent in a lot, and I compressed them into one long clip, but we're going to pause it at certain moments and talk about it.
Yeah, okay.
Again, Alyssa is a longtime listener who has worked in the death industry and is an incredible person, and she was gracious enough to send these in. So thank you so much, Alyssa.
Mm-hmm.
Ready?
I'm ready.
What is your relationship to death, and how does it tie into your mental health issues? My maternal grandmother died when I was 7. And I just remember vividly just being terrified at her viewing. My mom offered to walk me down to go see her, and I was too scared. I don't know if I thought she was going to pop back up or what, but I was too scared to view her. But that's honestly a vague core memory of my first brush with death and what it means and how permanent it really is. And then my dad died very suddenly when I was 13. He had been sick. He was coughing up blood and he was having seizures. So I won't say very suddenly, but it was one of those things where he otherwise was kind of in good spirits, and I thought he was just going to fight whatever it was until I said goodbye to him in a Kaiser Permanente and never saw him again. And he kept telling everybody, no, I just have a nosebleed. They say I have a nosebleed. And then I just remember him having like cotton swabs, like the ones with the long sticks up his nose. And I just remember that, and him telling me that he had a nosebleed and that they were going to treat it. And I don't know why I didn't believe him at the time, but I really genuinely just kind of was like, my dad's full of shit. And I mean, he was. He was addicted to drugs pretty severely, and he was an alcoholic. And he kind of hid that from me. And I had lived with him by myself. It was just me and him in the apartment. And I had just finally gotten to build a relationship with my dad when it happened. He wasn't there a lot. I mean, he was present, but he wasn't at the same time. So I only have a few memories of my dad from when I was young. A lot of them of which are just us playing video games together. But other than that, most of my memories of my dad and us building a relationship is when I got older and I started living with him. So when my dad passed away, I thought it was going to hit me a lot harder than it did, but it was actually really interesting how it happened. I didn't cry. I didn't cry when my dad died. I didn't cry at his funeral. It was really, really strange because people bring up the fact, like people who attended my dad's funeral bring up the fact that I was acting weird, that I was trying to make jokes because I was trying to make my little brother laugh, but that I was just acting super strange. And it kind of pissed me off because I was a grieving 13-year-old, and I don't know how you're supposed to act as a grieving 13-year-old for people to not bring that up when you're 26, 27. But anyway, yeah, I didn't cry. And I didn't know why. I didn't know if I was like, do I even miss him? And it took a long time for me to actually grieve my dad properly. About 10 years, actually. I didn't start grieving my dad really until maybe 8 years after he had died. When I had moved out of my mom's house, I finally started to grieve. And I finally started to realize, oh, my dad's gone forever. He's never coming back. He's never going to be able to attend my wedding or see me, graduate college or anything like that. Things that he said that he wanted to. So having this moment where I'm like, oh no, I never really got to grieve my dad almost a decade after I had lost him was really, really strange. Because I never, I grieved a lot differently as a 7-year-old than I did as a 13-year-old, where I cried because everyone else cried. I missed my grandma, but I never really, I didn't have any idea that she was gone forever. It never hit me as a child, as a 7-year-old, oh, my grandma is just permanently out of the picture. The only thing that is left of her is the memories that we carry. Because that's not how 7-year-olds think. They think, my grandma is gone. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel. You look to others and see how they feel to really kind of understand it, but you don't have that permanence, that direness. There's no abstract emotion to it. There's no 10-year-long grieving process. It's very immediate. You feel what you feel in that moment, and you grow with it. As you get older, your feelings start to kind of slow down a little bit. you mature, you process things a little bit differently now. And being able to mentally process what had happened to my dad was hard enough. But I had an epiphany where I did grieve my dad in that 10-year-long process, just not in a very apparent way. I was grieving him, but it wasn't a crying, screaming, bargaining kind of grief. It came in anxiety and numbness, which, was depression. It came in intrusive thoughts. I started getting really bad intrusive thoughts about death. Death was one of those things that just became a fixation. It was always looming. It made me realize very young that life is very fleeting. We had pets pass away. I would have to witness them. I had parakeets, and they live a while, but they don't live that long. I had hamsters, and I would always be the ones to find them. And so it just kind of solidified that constant cloud looming over me of death. I stopped wanting pets because I didn't want them to die in front of me. I stopped getting attached to people. I just kind of separated myself from people because I'm like, everybody's going to die. I'm going to die. And it was always in the back of my head. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And not in a suicidal way. I mean, I was passively suicidal at the time, but it was more just intrusive thoughts everywhere I looked. And to this day, I still have them when I look at things and I just imagine these gruesome ways that people die. And I it's never by my hand. I don't have violent thoughts. I have violent death thoughts, if that makes sense, where it's not purposeful. It's just an intrusive thought where I look at somebody and then I just imagine a horrible way they could die, or an animal, a horrible way that they could die, getting eaten or getting attacked, getting hit by a car, things like that, or seeing roadkill and imagining how they died. It became just a fixation that should not have been, but it really started after my dad passed because I was always inherently atheist. So people would tell me, oh, he's in a better place now. And all I'm thinking is, yeah, he's in a box. His ashes are in a box, and that's it. And it makes things very permanent. It makes things very difficult, which is why I think a lot of people do choose to believe that there is an afterlife, is because it's really hard to imagine yourself just not existing one day. I really want to emphasize that I am not denying anybody's religion. If you are religious and you believe in an afterlife, then that's what it is, okay? Whatever you say it is what it is. I'm not here to insult anyone's religion. I believe that everybody finds comfort in death, in dying, and comes to terms with dying in different ways. If you believe that you're going to go to heaven, then that's what it is. It is what you say it is, right? I'm just speaking my opinions. This is just how I feel. This is just my personal opinion. It has nothing to do with anybody else. But when I was a little kid sitting in church with my mom, it just never clicked for me. I never looked at that and went, yeah, that makes sense. I never looked at heaven or God or anything like that and went, yeah, that works for me. It was always a question of it. So of course, when my dad passed away, it was a question of where he is. There was never this thought in my head where he's like, my dad's in heaven now, smoking a joint with Bob Marley and Jimi Hendrix. Like, there was never this thought in my head where I was just like, he's in heaven. I didn't believe in heaven. I still don't, but I didn't believe in heaven. I didn't believe in hell. I didn't think that he was in either of those places. I just think he ceased to exist. There was no soul. There was no divine retribution. There was none of it. And I think that being so young and not having some kind of, afterlife in your thoughts, in your head, really makes death that much scarier and that much more permanent. And it's really difficult to process death in that way when you're a kid. So my mental health issues stemmed from the fact that my dad died, and my anxiety went through the roof because of it, because I became obsessed with death. And I had intrusive thoughts about death all the time. I still do. And how people die and what happens to them after they die and things like that. And knowing, like, everybody who told me, oh, he's in a better place now. I would look at them and I'm like, no, he's not. It wasn't that he was in a better place. He just wasn't there. He wasn't. he ceased to exist. It's just, there is no dad, you know?
First thoughts.
I took so many notes while she was talking.
Believe me, so did I.
Because, yeah, I have so many, like, personal things to relate to that. Right from the start, when the very first thing she said about, you know, like, her grandma, that's, you know, like, what I've been thinking coming into this is I'm like, well, the first person I remember dying is my great-grandmother. And she had always been in really pretty good health, like, into her 90s. Like, she died at, I think, 94, and it really was, you know, just like the 6 months before, then she just started having major health problems and going downhill fast. And that, for me, was probably about 7 or 8 when she died. But, you know, when I'm 5 or 6, then she lived with, you know, my grandparents that were her child and husband. And, you know, I'd go over there and she'd be there and, you know, and she was funny and she was always with it. So, you know, I knew her.
Yeah, she was in your life.
Right. But she also was, 93, 94. So it's not like everyone was surprised.
Exactly.
But what I did remember when Alyssa was starting to talk, is I was like, oh yeah, I remember that being the first funeral that I went to. And yeah, when I had to go up and look at her, I remember being really creeped out. And that ever since then, I've felt like people in the showings, like their skin looks like plastic to me.
Alyssa has worked, I don't know the details if she was a mortician's assistant or what.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But she has worked with morticians and she knows, she goes later into more detail about like that process. But it really is jarring if you're not used to it. And depending on the mortician, like some people can truly look even more scary.
Yeah, I always think of, like weird plastic skin and the smell of lilies. And both of those things like really unsettle me.
I actually have experienced one death that I did know kind of personally. So it was my cousin. Mm-hmm. He was in his late 20s when he died. He had like a sudden aneurysm or something.
Oh, okay.
And I was, I think, like 18 when it happened. Mm-hmm. So I had known him, as you know, extended relatives that live in other states. Yeah. Like I'd seen him on and off over the years, and he was very young, and so it was, it did hit me. But again, like Alyssa was saying, not as hard as I thought it should have. Like I remember going to the funeral with my family, and of course, when someone that young dies, it's heartbreaking, and everyone is very emotional. And I remember just being in line to see his body, and it was like you said, very plasticky, and it didn't look like him. Yeah. And I knew it wasn't him, even though at the time I was still in the religion, like I was trying to be a Christian. But I couldn't, like, everyone was talking about how he was in a better place, and it just didn't seem like that was enough for me. Like, I didn't feel better.
Yeah, I had something on that, too, because I also... doesn't sound like quite as much as you, but I grew up in a religious household. Pretty much everyone in my family was Catholic. I went to Catholic school, and I remembered a point where every year on my birthday, you're supposed to make a wish when you blow out your candles.
Yeah.
And I want to say from like age 8 to 13 or something like that, every single time my wish was that I would go to heaven.
Oh, wow.
And it was because I didn't have the same sort of beliefs as my parents. I did, and would say I still do, believe that there is, some sort of higher something there. But at the same time, I also really accept the idea that I could be wrong.
Exactly.
I have no proof.
I believe that we don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. That's my number one belief, but I'm not going to be like, well, if there's nothing, I'm not going to be shocked because I won't be around. But also, I'm like, I'm not going to be shocked to find out, like, actually there is no afterlife and you're just gone.
Yeah, it's a lot. I did want to tell a quick story. I don't want to spend too much time on it because religion and the afterlife is something that we could easily spend a whole episode on.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to talk about it too much, but as you may know, listeners, I grew up in a very religious household, more so than the normal person, and I struggled with it, and a lot of my mental health issues stemmed from feeling like I should have had faith, but I didn't, feeling like I wasn't enough. And when I moved out at 18, I went to this Christian school and dropped out 2 years later, and throughout the whole time, I was trying to figure out who I was and what I believed in and all that jazz. So in 2013, I was living with my aunt in Texas, and I was pretty certain that I didn't believe in God anymore, but I hadn't told anyone about it. Even on this podcast, I haven't really told the whole story yet. I don't think I'm ready to.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But I had just started riding motorcycles. This also ties into David's comment from earlier. I had just started riding motorcycles, and it was October 27th, 2013. The 9-year anniversary just passed a couple days ago. And I totaled my first bike. I got put in the ambulance with, like, major contusions. I was wearing a helmet, so, like, nothing life-threatening, but it was scary. And I was on a lot of drugs. And my parents lived, like, 2 hours away at the time, so they came to the hospital to see me. And in my drugged haze, I remember looking at my mom and saying, I don't believe in God anymore. And then she and my dad both looked down at me and they said, we know.
Aww.
Like, bitch, we know. And that was the first time that I kind of came out as an atheist. So tying it back to Alyssa's voicemail, I find it really hard to deal with death as someone who doesn't believe in an afterlife because I don't know what's going to happen. And I kind of am more on the side of everything is random, like nothing happens after you die. And that's what I believe, but I don't always love believing it. Yeah. It's not a very comforting worldview.
Yeah, I understand. Because like I said, I feel like very, very uncertain. And I do understand the people that are certain. I'm just kind of like, I get what it does for you. And I kind of wish I had something like that, but I don't.
Yeah. Any other thoughts before we play the rest?
Yeah. So
Please.
Something I wanted to say really quick, and this might be something that I get into more later because it's not quite death related. It's close. So when I was like 6 years old, apparently my dad had, I know that it was labeled a bleeding ulcer, but it sounds like it was more serious than that. Like something hadn't formed right in his inside anatomy. So like not only was his stomach was filling with blood and then, it would all come out, but also like they'd go into the hospital and they couldn't find it because they didn't know where to look.
That's so scary. How old were you when this was going on?
So I was 6.
Oh, yeah.
And because like we're in this really small town, so my dad ended up having to go to like University of Michigan, like big major hospital, so they could figure out what was going on. But it wasn't till I was older that my mom told me more about like I just knew like my dad went into the hospital and like they needed better doctors, so he was gone for a few months. But my mom told me later things where she's just like, she's like, we took him in, and I remember seeing things like once they took his blood pressure and it was 40/0.
What does that mean?
Well, normal is like 120/80, I believe.
I should know this.
I'm pretty sure neither of those numbers should ever be 0.
Oh my God.
And my mom said also like she saw like nurses were basically squeezing bags of blood to get them into him fast enough.
Oh, that kind of stuff makes, like, there's going to be a lot of descriptions coming up about bodily functions pertaining to death. I just wanted to throw that out there if you're squeamish by that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, anyway, continue. Yeah.
But so the thing that is just kind of like weird that I think of is, yes, okay, that was serious. And then they did, eventually figure it out so that he could continue living. But like this, I wanted to say even earlier because I feel like it relates a lot to you feeling like, oh, I'm 30 and I've never had any major like brush with death or anything like that. And I remember thinking in like my late teens and 20s and stuff like that when people were having like major upheavals in their family or major crises and things like that. And I was always just kind of felt sort of awkward as in like, well, nothing really bad has ever happened to me.
There's that minimizing again.
Yeah, but it always just kind of felt, like I've never had any like big drama or anything like really serious happen in my life. And that would be something that would come up sometimes is be like, I wonder what it would have been like if my dad died when I was 6. That would have been a major thing.
That's another topic to talk about later is like how close we've all come to that without realizing it. Or like, that's the thing. You can't think about that because then you go down the spiral of like, oh my God, like what if they had died at that time? And like, what if they die now because I'm thinking about it?
Yeah, or like, how would my life have been if I hadn't grown up with a dad the last 25 years?
But also, you say that nothing like terrible has happened to you. I would disagree.
Oh, yeah.
Knowing your story, like we all minimize a little bit, but I think you minimize a lot.
And you will find out later. There's a big one that I don't believe I've told you at all that really relates to this episode.
Yeah, Lauren
Yes.
and I have only been co-hosts for 12 episodes now. We're still finding out about each other.
Right.
Okay, anything else?
No, I'm ready to continue.
All right.
Something in the death industry that you'll see that's very common is actually a really interesting thing. You know, you have your criers and then you have your laughers. Those are the ones you got to watch out for. Everybody grieves very differently. Some people they joke around, they laugh, they do what I did, which is go completely numb and just don't even laugh or cry, just kind of are very neutral. You see people who lose very close family members who just don't react at all. But what people don't see is the fighting, the infighting. A lot of families have infighting. And believe it or not, it's over assets. It's always over assets. You wouldn't believe the kind of greed that comes out of people when they are grieving or when somebody has passed away. People will fight over the dumbest crap you could imagine. Wife lost her husband. He was in his 60s. I believe he had cancer and he had died. And wife and the husband's sister got into a huge fight over who was going to get his lawnmower. Like the sister wanted the lawnmower back because she had given it to him as a birthday gift. My mom had the same thing where she had a lot of infighting whenever my grandmother passed away, and whenever my grandfather passed away, there was a lot of infighting because he was a stepdad and the son came out of the freaking woodwork asking for everything under the sun. But my mom did the same thing after my dad died. My mom went into the apartment where my dad and I lived and just started taking anything that was valuable. Meanwhile, my brother's mom, my brother and I share the same dad, but different moms. My brother's mom is scrubbing blood off the walls in my dad's room where he had coughed up blood and had wiped it on the wall. It looked like a crime scene. And meanwhile, my mom's just anything she could get her hands on, she was grabbing. Anything she could find of value, she took. So what's really common, I guess I would say, is people will fight over the pettiest crap you could imagine. The pettiest stuff. Tensions are high, emotions are high. People tend to, funeral homes tend not to bring the best out in people because of things like spending a lot of money. It's not cheap. Death is not a cheap thing. It's a burden on families. And you have greedy family members who come out of the woodworks. It's a lot. So you have a lot of fighting. Something you'll notice about employees themselves is how much they have to separate themselves from families and how much they have to separate themselves from the bodies themselves. Unless you have a really good mortician. They'll tend to talk to the bodies. Bodies are very reactionary. Even after you expire, you do a lot of active things after you die. So while body prepping, things like eyes will pop open, liquids will ooze, things like that. Sometimes bodies would exhale and make noises like, that one's scary, but it's very common. Twitches, movements, all very common when it comes to prepping bodies for funerals. It's quite normal. Your brain doesn't just die and that's it. The rest of your body will still try to work as long as it can before it dies itself. Some parts of your body will die later than others, like nerves and cells. So when that happens, for those nerves dying off, you'll have muscle spasms because of it, and you'll have been long dead, but suddenly your finger's twitching, or suddenly your eyelids are popping open, or suddenly your mouth is dropping. It's all very common. Also, when we expire, we're full of air. So when a mortician is moving the body around, they're putting pressure on the abdomen. So they're pushing out that air. So sometimes people will make noises or will exhale afterward. Would I say there are ways that people react to death that society deems inappropriate? So here's the thing about society. Society is always ever changing. Society always changes from one year to the next. There was a time when society deemed showing a woman's ankle as inappropriate. There was a time when wearing two pieces of cloth together was deemed inappropriate, two pieces of different materials together was deemed inappropriate. There's not much value on what society deems as appropriate or inappropriate because it's constantly changing. There's no one way to grieve. There's no one way to respond to death. Death is a very difficult thing to talk about, mainly because of the things I already addressed, which is the permanence of it, the fact that people can't see themselves cease to exist. People can't imagine a life in which they are not alive and conscious. There was a time when society viewed death in a far more natural light. It was a part of life. And it had a lot to do with the fact that there were setbacks in medicine. Modern medicine has made death this sacred thing because our mortality rate has dropped significantly. But if you think about the late Middle Ages, when the bubonic plague was outbreaking, and even the plague of Justinian before that, and then later on in the Victorian era, you had death photography because infant mortality rates were very, very common, and child mortality rates. If you think about when the Oregon Trail was happening, children would just disappear and never come back. Children died of dysentery. You had, like I said, the Victorian era when they had smallpox and an outbreak of syphilis. Our life expectancy has increased with modern medicine, and with it, we have strayed further and further away from death because of it, which means that our fear of death is a direct result of society's adversity to death. And I'm not saying I'm not making a slight at modern medicine. I'm saying it's a great thing that we have this deterrent to death because it proves that we have a much higher life expectancy because we've done all of this research to make it so we can treat things like smallpox and polio and all of these other diseases that are perfectly curable and non-transmittable now. But I say that with the added effect that if society deems somebody's response to death, however it may be, as unacceptable, whether they make dark jokes, whether they cry uncontrollably and hysterically, whether they get really angry, whether they take their shirt off and swing it around their head and go, woo, it's all because of the strangeness and the distance that we have from death, that it is the way that it is.
All right, pause. So there's a lot to talk about here. When we were drafting the questions we wanted to ask her, I know you specifically wanted to hear about what are some inappropriate reactions to death.
Yeah.
So what do you think about her answer?
It was kind of like what I had thought. I feel like maybe I just kind of wanted some confirmation. So yeah, here's my big story that I've been saving. When I was 10 years old, then my 13-year-old sister died.
Oh, shit.
And the thing is, she was born with some sort of brain damage. When she was born, because this was in the 70s, I know they called it water on the brain, but I've since learned about that condition, and that is not what this was. I've never seen anyone else with such severe brain damage, because she did not talk at all. She could not move hardly. She just, kind of laid curled up on the couch and sometimes made little jerky movements. She never grew much past the size of 6-year-old. She would have been 13 when she died. And that's what I think of is because I was a 10-year-old, and first of all, I was not sad.
Well, yeah, you didn't really know her.
No, she didn't even have, there can be people that have some brain damage and maybe are born that way or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I want to be politically correct. But
well, yeah, you're speaking about your experience.
Yeah. But yes.
And that's what you were thinking.
There are people that are born with some sort of, thing like that, and they still have a personality. Maybe they can't speak English words, but maybe they can react in some way. This was nothing. This was like having a doll that sometimes gurgled. And so it was nothing. And the thing that even at 10 years old, I remember made me feel really guilty is that part of me was kind of glad because my family we couldn't do much. Someone always had to be taking care of her. There's things that I wanted to do. I wanted to play sports and be in dance and stuff like that. And I couldn't because there was no one to take me to these things because my mom always had to be home with my sister.
And it was probably expensive too, just her care and everything, I can imagine.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, she had this specific kind of like car seat wheelchair that went in the back of our car. If we had to go like grocery shopping or something like that, then my mom just had to like take her with us. And I think I became desensitized to it because I was so used to it. But I'm like, I'm sure people were staring at us and being like, what is wrong with that girl?
Wow. You know what's kind of ironic? In this moment, having just heard that, I had no idea about that. I'm learning along with you listeners, and I'm in this moment, I'm thinking about my reaction to this news. Like, what is the appropriate way to respond to someone who just told you that their 13-year-old sister died when they're 10? How fucked up is that?
No, because that's also part of, you know, like I said, because I never had a relationship or anything, so it wasn't like a big sadness for me when it happened. So it's not something I tend to volunteer because I don't want to see people be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That must have been so terrible, because then I feel guilty all over again. Like, it really wasn't.
Yeah, and like Alyssa was saying, there are no inappropriate reactions to it. Like, that reaction that you had was perfectly valid and makes sense to me, like, as an outsider.
Yeah. I mean, the time when I felt like I did finally start to at least, like, felt like I grieved something was not until I was about 30, and that was when I finally thought of it in terms of, you know, I was supposed to have a sister, like a sister that's 3 years older than me. You know, she's going to be a senior in high school when I'm a freshman. She's going to like argue with me all the time for wanting to follow her and copy her. And then she's going to want to beat up the kids that make fun of me. And, you know, it's like, I didn't get any of that. And that was the part I think, that was the saddest.
That is really sad. And I have a lot of follow-up questions that we don't have time to go to now.
Yeah,
I really don't want to just brush past this news. But we do need to keep going with the episode.
But yeah, this is something we can talk about more later. Like I said, it wasn't even until this episode that I realized, wow, I should maybe bring that up.
Yeah. What did you think about what Alyssa said about the bodies and stuff? I almost didn't keep that in, but I wanted to because it is part of death. Like, you're going to be dead someday, and you're going to have people die. I don't know. For me, it's comforting to know what happens, like, after, and that it's normal.
Yeah, I like kind of a logical explanation. Like, I feel like I've heard in the past, you know, people say things like, this could happen, you know, I mean, everyone says, like, you empty your bowels afterwards, or, or I've heard things where they say, like, oh, you know, people can sound like they sigh, but, you know, it's just a thing. But when she said, like, that different parts of your body actually die at different points, then I was like, that makes sense why all this stuff happens.
It makes sense, but it also freaks me out.
Oh, it's creepy. I agree, but at least I understand why.
Bodies just freak me out. Not just dead bodies, but living bodies freak me out. We don't have time to talk about that now. No. Are you ready to play the last part of her voicemail?
Yeah.
Some misconceptions about death is that I really, really, really want to emphasize this. Death is not a medical event. Death is a part of life. People always look at death in this very clinical, analytical way, and it is not quite that. Yes, there is clinical and medical aspects to it. Of course there are. Everything that has to do with the human body is very clinical. But to view death as a medical event is to completely disregard life as an abstract experience. I think when we look at death traditions and we look at the different ways in which people handle death and funerals in general, we get a better aspect of how other cultures really view death still in that light of it being a part of life. You know, you have, my favorite, of course, is the New Orleans jazz funerals, because they're so lively, even after somebody is dead. It's still so lively. It's so awesome. You have sky funerals in Tibet. You have in Indonesia, they pretty much do a weekend at Bernie's with your body, you know. There are so many different ways in which people celebrate life. They use death as an excuse to celebrate life, which is what I really feel like us, especially in the United States, are lacking. I know that New Orleans is in the United States. I mean, overall, unless you are in New Orleans, which is where, you know, that's death central. If you think about it, it's really one of the only places in the United States that really has a grasp on what it means to live and what it means to die. And it has a lot to do with hurricanes, and it has a lot to do with just their culture and their Creole culture. A lot of what they've adopted came from Haitian immigrants. So they have somewhat of a grasp that not a lot of other places in different states have, because they've had such a large melting pot of other cultures kind of influence that. So a really common vampire trope is these beautiful forever immortals, right? And then you always see in certain films, and you see it in books all the time, where they start to get really frustrated with life because they start to realize that they're not living anymore, that they're just existing. It's really interesting to me because it really touches on that aspect of how important death is for life. Without death, you are not living. Without that looming aspect of that time is finite and that everything and everyone dies, you lose a part of yourself that is distinctly alive. And it does this thing where it makes humans do everything with the utmost importance. It's frantic. You want to love hard. You want to be happy. You want to experience things. You want to go travel. You want to meet new people. You want to socialize. Every emotion that you feel feels dire because you know that eventually it'll be gone. And I think that people have this concept, this obsession with immortality as if it's not so dreadfully boring. And I guess that kind of ties into that last, almost second to last question about what are some things that people can do to make death less scary? Mark Twain put it best. I do not fear death. I had been dead for billions and billions of years before and had not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it. Essentially what he's saying is, I was fine before I was born. I'll be fine when I go. And this quote brings me the utmost comfort. It really does, because if you think about it, wow, I had no idea what was going on before I was born. You weren't alive. You weren't born yet. And to imagine life, and to imagine death, I should say, to imagine death the same exact way as before you were born makes it far less scary. And not to get too political, but, after the overturning of Roe v. Wade and me kind of expressing my distaste of it, people would bring up the talking point of, well, your mom didn't abort you. Aren't you glad to be here? Well, if she had aborted me, I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known. I had no consciousness. My only ask is that when I drift away and I rejoin the void, that I don't die in pain or in scared. And even more than that, I'm scared to die scared. It's not even really in pain that I'm scared of. It's just dying scared. I want to die relatively at peace. So I just think of it like before I was born. It wasn't like I was waiting to be born. I had no consciousness. I had no knowing. So those two things bring me the most comfort. Imagining that it was before I was ever born, and imagining death as a part of life, because that's what it is. Everybody dies. Everything dies. From the little mouse to the fly to the big oak tree, they all die. Everything dies. And knowing that death is just a part of life, and knowing that everything dies, also brings me comfort. It makes me feel far less alone. It makes death a far less lonely experience. I think people are really, really afraid of being forgotten. I think that's something that a lot of people don't admit. When you talk about death, people are terrified of talking about death. They're scared. It's like the looming thing. They're scared of talking about death because then it happens. And they're also scared to acknowledge that one day, centuries down the line, their stories may never be told again. And to that, I just want to say that to this day, we still talk about our ancestors, all of us. So you'll just be lumped in with that. You'll just be one of those ancestors lumped in with the rest of the ancestors who just look down upon your successors and just grimace because they're, doing unspeakable things to a 3D model of some anime character, So don't worry, you're not going to be forgotten. You're just going to be a very disgruntled ancestor. But even more than that, if you want to be remembered, take notes. Start writing a book. Do things that you can pass down to family members so that your story can continue to be told years from now. I really want people to take comfort in the fact that you won't be forgotten. You won't die for nothing. Dying is a part of life. What you should be afraid of is living for nothing. Live for something. Have meaning. Find meaning. Find meaning in yourself. Take that with you and run with it. Some lasting thoughts. I believe that we have strayed too far away from death. I think we need to come back. We need to be able to talk about it comfortably. I still can't have a conversation with my husband about what I want when I die, because it's one of those things that could very well happen, sooner than I'd like. And I want to be able to have my remains respected the way I want them to. But people are so adverse to talking about death that they just don't. And it is very, very important that we talk about it. We talk about being scared to die. We talk about being scared to be forgotten. We talk about being alive and trying, and we talk about being scared to not find meaning in life before we die. We talk about these things. We're able to verbalize our fears. We become better communicators. We can actively and proactively look to solving these feelings and mitigating these feelings and just generally coming to terms with them.
And that's it.
Okay.
That Mark Twain quote gave me chills.
I know.
I've heard her voicemails like 4 times while I was editing, and like every time it gave me chills. It's so good.
Yes.
And just talking about being afraid of death needs to be normalized, I think. Or like, not just that part, it's like she was saying, not just the fear of death, but just the inevitability of death and death in general. Why don't we talk about that more? I mean, I know why.
Yeah, I think around the time when she made that Mark Twain quote and also was talking about how the vampire stories tend to go and things like that, then I actually wrote down, death is scary, but how scary is the thought of living forever?
Oh, I've always thought that. That's one reason why I had so much anxiety about going to heaven as a kid, because I could not imagine being happy just being up there forever, just worshiping Jesus or whatever.
I can't understand forever. Yes.
Forever is such a really scary concept to me. Even scarier than death, I think, is just the concept of forever. And so I really love how she said, you didn't exist forever and you're not going to exist after you die, but that's okay. Like, how less scary is that?
Yeah, and going back to, like what I said earlier is I vaguely believe there is an afterlife, but I fully accept there could not be.
Who knows?
And I think that is part of it, is because it doesn't give me comfort either way.
Yeah, either way I'm anxious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like, I can't understand just not existing, but I can understand forever.
Yeah, it's scary, heavy stuff, which is why I love the way she ended it, just telling... Sorry, I dropped my vape. Just like urging people to not live for nothing. And I mean, look at this podcast, for instance. Like, we're telling our stories on here, and it's kind of dumb, and who knows how many people listen, but it exists. It's a record of what we went through, and that brings me some comfort. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, when she started this section, it was something she was talking about, and I made some notes because I thought of how, like, when she was talking about how different people treat death.
That was really good.
I've come to realize that, like, one of my favorite things when people die is I like it when it is an opportunity to remember the good times and to tell funny stories and to really make it like a celebration of life, as cheesy as that sounds, but
totally.
So my aunt died when she was 60, so not, not super young, but too young. She had 2 daughters, and one of them was the one daughter's godparent, and they also share a birthday. So I know they've always kind of felt some connection, and this is the sister that is within a year of my mom, so they, grew up very close. So within like the year or 2 after she died, then my mom, I know, worked on making a book where she got some other people to write some things, and she wrote a lot of memories, and especially, like growing up with this sister so close, and she gave it to her daughter, and there was just... Yeah, and there was just, there was like really sweet things from people that remembered her, and she was important in their life. And there was also things like, one of them is, my mom told the story about how when they were like really little, maybe like 7 or 8, and they had to sleep in the same bed, then she said at night that they would take out their shoes and they would pretend like their shoes were people going on dates.
Oh my god, that is adorable.
And when they'd kiss at the end of the night, then the one shoe would, like, lift off the floor, like, woo!
That is so cute. And all kids do stuff like that. Like, I did stuff like that with my sisters. And that is the kind of thing that needs to be remembered.
Yeah, I just love that she had these cute little sweet stories to tell, you know, just, I imagine, like, if I was my cousin getting that, that would give me some comfort.
I definitely feel comforted after making this episode. Alyssa, I can't thank you enough for sending those in. I wish we could have had you as a proper guest, but we're not ready for that yet. But before we close it out, do you have any more thoughts?
I think the only thing that came up, and I don't even know what all to say about this, is just that I've realized that I don't have that fear that other people do about being forgotten. That's the same sort of thing where I'm just kind of like, I'm not going to be here.
Yeah.
Why do I care?
That's a really good point. Why do I care so much? I'm not going to be here.
I mean, it's the same thing as funeral stuff. Like, I don't care about people remembering me. And some people, like, go vehemently the other way, I feel like, where they're just like, I want to be cremated. I don't want any sort of ceremony. I don't want anyone standing around. But, you know, like they say, funerals are for the living. So if it's going to make the people living feel better, then okay, put me on display. I don't want it, but whatever.
And I will say that knowing what happens when I die does give me some relief from this death anxiety that I have. So even though I know that I won't be around for it, just knowing that I have some control, or like knowing what might happen after I die, gives me comfort. It's kind of like a middle ground. I do think everyone should have some sort of plan, even if it's like a Google Doc that you make when you're stoned. Not that I did that.
No.
That is actually kind of how I want to wrap up. I did not find a pickle palate cleanser for this episode because, first of all, I didn't really have a lot of time, and also I think this is a more serious episode, and it would be kind of disrespectful to just like make a ton of jokes and laugh at the end. But I did want to leave us, I did want to leave us with something a little lighthearted, and so I found the Google Doc that I mentioned just now that I may or may not have made when I was stoned. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's embarrassing and I want to change some of it. But there's this one paragraph that I want to read because it's so funny. So this is what I want to happen to my motorcycle after I die. My bike goes to whoever wants it most. But the caveat is that if people can't come to an agreement, the winner must be decided by a panel of PowerPoint presentation judges. Non-family members are welcome to participate. Hell, they don't even have to have known me if they want to PowerPoint it up for my bike. Should be spicy. So
nice.
It's obviously like not legally binding at all. I'll probably like revise it, but like just doing something like that is better than nothing. And I don't know, I had fun when I made it, and now I feel like at least it'll give my family members a laugh. You know,
I like that.
So I hope that you listeners were comforted by this as much as we were. We are going to talk more about
some of the things that came up.
Some of the stuff that came up. I feel like we almost need a part 2 to this.
I know. I was like, we had a few things we had to brush by because time.
But yeah, this is a really long episode, so happy Halloween, everybody. And yeah, that's all I got.
Don't be too afraid of death.
Don't be too afraid of death. Go out and celebrate it. You know, if you're the kind of person that likes to celebrate death and that makes you feel less anxious about death, by all means, go. This is your holiday. Go enjoy it. Be safe. Yeah. And we'll see you next week. Lauren will be moved into her new apartment.
Yay!
And you'll hear all about it.
Yes.
Okay, bye.